Chapter 12, Strategy. And the strategy better not involve leaving in the middle of the night again.
Morgan, using yourself as collateral is not an option.
I'm pretty sure it has to be an option, Lance. This problem won't just go away, and our options are limited.
As of right now, we don't even know how Nyx is going to respond to their retrieval unit finding you, if they respond at all. So far, they have made no moves. And if they send someone, as I mentioned, it will be a small team, not an army.
Have they even reviewed the records yet?
The records have been uploaded to a restricted repository. No one has accessed them.
I know you prefer to wait and respond after you see which direction they're going to move, but I don't think it would hurt to come up with a set of options.
Even as a last resort, I don't think it's necessary to give up your entire life for this. You came out here trying to escape that fate, and you built something for yourself here. I don't want to see you give that up.
I'm not talking about nipping off to Braceil and turning myself over. First, Viria was the one that said if we could solidify my relationship to the Nomos, it would reduce Endgame's grasp on me.
That's a possibility, but I'm not entirely sure Endgame would let that one slide on a technicality. And we don't know that a citizenship will be ready in time.
Which doesn't mean it can't be on the table or in the works. Yeah, okay. Even if I don't need it for this particular situation, it sounds like Morgan still wants to become a citizen, so no harm in getting it going, and if it works out time-wise and you need it, then it's there-ish, maybe?
That's true. But in the event that fails, what then?
I'm not sure. The problem is that there are 3 vulnerabilities here. Avalon, you, and me. If I leave and hide with the Nomos, Nyx will still find you, which will put Avalon at risk.
And if you and I leave together?
They'll search the area, figuring we might be hiding nearby, which means they could still find Avalon, I assume.
That is my concern, yes.
Of the 3 vulnerabilities, 2 of them must be protected at all costs. And he's like, no, all 3 must be. Lance slid his hand across the bench top and held mine tight. I knew it. I knew this guy. I love you for it.
All 3 of us should be protected at all costs.
I think the rest of the planet would put me at a much lower priority.
I, however, would place you in the number 1 spot.
No. But you and I both know there is a much more profound danger where you and Avalon are concerned.
It's true Nyx or anyone else would love to gain control of the planetary AI. But in the end, Morgan, I'm just an old computer. A dusty relic that...
You know that's not all you are. You've never been just that. I touched his cheek, letting my hand rest there for his face. Especially not to me.
There have been enough shattered dreams because of me. Enough violence. I don't want that anymore.
What do you think will happen if they find you? It will just be more fighting. You know that. I also don't want this to turn into violence or fighting, but sometimes you have to defend what's important.
At times like these, I believe it would be better if I had returned to my dormant state back then.
But then we would never have met, and I wouldn't want that. He shut his eyes, covering my hand with his.
Me either.
Lance, you need to understand something. If I stay here and they come here for me, I'll have to defend myself, and this place, and you, with everything I have. I may be untrained and unqualified for that kind of situation, but I won't let myself or you be dragged away by those people. I went through that once. Not again.
Then I'll have to come up with another solution before that happens. If they come. And I'll be watching close so we know the moment they make that call.
Knowing in advance would help, but if Nyx came for me, I wasn't sure what we feasibly could do about it. Admittedly, I was a queen rank and Lance was a king rank. That was a formidable combination. Or might have been if I'd had more than the minimal training I had. I mean, I could use Psi, but I couldn't fight. And Lance? I couldn't begin to imagine the things he was capable of. But that was as Lance, not Deimos Fianchetto as they knew him to be. If we stood our ground here, then we could not let him show any abilities that would arouse suspicions and lead to even more conflict. If they sent a highly trained team of Espers to us, could we stand against that? And if we did, then what? What would we do with them? It wasn't like there was a jail here to deal with Espers. I'd like to toss them in the desert and let them have fun with the first sand flare they encounter. Okay, maybe not. That was a bit cruel. The frustration I was feeling must have been written on my face. Lance gave my forehead a flick. Thanks.
Let's take the situation one step at a time. For now, why don't we focus on a few added precautions to help protect Avalon?
What kind of precautions?
We can't stop someone on foot from finding its physical location. However, it's not easily accessible that way. Certainly not if you don't already know where it is. The original above-ground structure was destroyed long ago, and you must access it from a sort of hidden back entrance. Of course, the reason we want to avoid an on-foot search of the area is because difficult isn't the same as impossible. It's possible someone doing a thorough search of the area would stumble on it, explore, and realize they found something significant.
Aren't there security systems? Surely there's some kind of security. I assume you can't just walk in.
You'd be surprised. Your initial colonist did in fact just walk in.
King was offline when that happened, but now...
There are security systems, yes. Not external anymore. I took those offline. I can't imagine a more obvious sign something important is nearby than a surprise encounter with a security protocol.
Fair enough. But... please tell me there's at the very least a door.
There is a door. One that is disguised, no less. But that door might pass a visual inspection, not one that involves Psi. We want to avoid any searching of that area, but a clairvoyant search in particular might reveal something is there. While it may take an intruder time to brute force the door and get past internal security, it would be best if we could keep the location concealed.
You told me once that you were using reverse cages to do that, right?
The ways have psi dampeners that mimic the function of a reverse cage, yes. I was hoping you could place a proper reverse cage over Avalon, something that would add a layer of protection. There was one long ago, but it faded as time passed. A new one would vastly reduce one of your 3 vulnerabilities, and give me more confidence its location would be safe from a simple psychic sweep of the area.
Alright. That makes sense, even if it doesn't entirely mitigate the risk. It's one less thing to worry about as much. But you'll have to explain how to do it.
Of course. It's not difficult, especially with your level of ability. You're already doing things much more difficult. This is just another thing you have to learn to do consciously because you're already doing it unconsciously. If not, you'd be overwhelmed by what you're aware of within your sphere.
But my sphere is usually small enough that it doesn't bother me.
That's a common way for people to view their sphere, but it's not quite right. What we refer to as a sphere is just the natural range of your awareness. It's much easier for most to visualize as a radius that can shrink or grow. But people who can reshape their sphere are rare. Most of us have a set range. It could be 10 yards, or it could be 200 kilometers, but the range itself never changes. What we change is the size and density of the reverse cage we keep around ourselves to block it all out.
So rather than expanding my sphere, it's more like raising a blindfold I usually wear?
That's a good analogy. In the end, it doesn't matter what sort of mental image you use for your sphere. Most rely on the idea of shrinking and expanding it, which is fine. But in this case, it's useful to pay closer attention to what you're doing, because the reverse cage is a skill we want you to learn to control. That requires deconstructing the process.
When you put it that way, it did make sense. I'm assuming I'm not going to actively maintain this reverse cage, but sort of pre-program it to maintain itself?
Yes. As you've learned before, you can set up rules for your Psi to follow without dedicating focus or stamina towards it. What I'll be teaching you is that you can also create a packet of Psi energy that you sever from yourself. This energy can continue to maintain itself according to the program you give it ahead of time.
Interesting.
For a while anyway, depending on the strength and density of your Psi. Like all energy fields, these sorts of things disperse over time. It's a common technique for reverse cages like this, shields, even mental traps and attacks like mind bombs.
Oh, okay. I was wondering about those. So those are just things that are separate from the person and they're not actively maintaining it, which makes sense. Mind bombs? That sounds horrifying.
They're not pleasant, usually. But for now, we'll focus on the reverse cage. You can consider defense as the first step in a plan in progress to protect ourselves.
Alright, so step 1 was to bolster Avalon's defenses. Well, it was more like bolstering Avalon's stealth mode, but same thing. I had to admit I was intrigued by this mind bomb thing Lance had mentioned, because passive defenses and attacks might be a good way to deal with a small team that might come our way. And that could buy us time to get my situation settled in a way that would allow us to seek help from Endgame. Though Lance was right that there was no guarantee they would honor whatever agreement they had with the Nomos. If we couldn't ask the Nomos for help and we couldn't trust Endgame, was there anyone else? I mean, you could reach out to Baby Bro and Crimson. Maybe.
Morgan?
Sorry. I'm sorry. What were you saying?
Let's just focus on one thing at a time. Reverse cage first.
Right. Reverse cage. Is it possible to set up a reverse cage remotely? If they happen to be observing our movements with Psi, we can't risk going there in person, right?
Now that you are back on the grid, so to speak, there would be a risk, yes. A small one. There's a chance you'd be able to detect it if we were being observed. And we are far from the night side. I'm not sure they have any Espers with that much range, but physical range can get tricky when it comes to bishops.
Probably best not to risk it then. I don't even know what detecting it would feel like, so I think it's wise to exercise caution here.
I agree. And yes, you'll be able to set up a reverse cage from here. Based on your prior teleporting experiences, I believe Avalon is well within range of your sphere. As I said, you're already doing it, but we want to teach you how it works so you can program a cage to remain even without your focus.
Right. I'm ready. Lance and I had worked on Psi training before, of course. We worked on shields and other things. He worked with me as we cleaned up from breakfast, then as we took care of the plants in the greenhouse. I was used to his teaching methods, explaining things while I watered plants or demonstrating techniques on nearby planters. At first I wanted to sit down and focus just on the techniques, but as I helped him with the watering and pruning, the tension flowed out of me and I found myself focusing better. Which was no doubt his intent. He had always proved not just a natural teacher, but acutely aware of the easiest ways for me to learn. I wondered if he was just accustomed to it because he'd raised his little brother. But it could just be that he was, well, him. Sometimes I forgot King had kind of been the progenitor of Espers in a way. The Lawsons, his creators, had possessed Psi for one, and then when humans developed it because of the nanites, King was the first to be aware of it. King defined everything we knew about Espers, including our classification and ranking systems. He had more time than anyone to study the psychic phenomenon in humans, so Lance probably understood Psi better than anyone else on the planet. Though that was likely true of many things other than just Psi as well. Either way, that understanding came through in his simple explanations of how to visualize and deconstruct the method behind every aspect of using Psi. Even though I still had much to learn, I didn't know that I'd have grown so fast under the tutelage of someone else.
The important thing to remember is that your goal is to deflect Psi outward versus inward like a normal cage.
Now that I can recognize the one I keep up around myself, it's much easier to understand it. I think I also have a better understanding of sphere now as well. As you said, it's not about expanding, it's just about removing the block on it.
And the ones you've put up for practice.
They're still there. I can also remove them if I need to. Can you really not detect them at all?
I can't sense the cages around the terrariums, no. But it's a little tricky since I can see the terrarium, so you can't quite block them from my sight either. How do they look to you?
Like a loose net of psi energy, I suppose.
I think we should take a break for a while so you can rest before we attempt to have you place one over Avalon.
You want me to do it already?
Why not? If it fails, we can just try again after more practice. There is no harm in making an attempt.
I let out a sigh as I went to wash the dirt off my hands. Working on this technique and feeling what it's like to remove everything blocking my natural awareness has shown me how much I've been instinctively protecting myself over the years. Keeping my senses dull, limiting my own abilities.
All Espers do it to some degree. The Queens are particularly adept at keeping their defenses up.
It's staggering to think what I might be capable of if I let myself try.
I hope Nyx doesn't force you to reveal that.
Same. I think everyone might be better off that way. We took a lunch break after that, and I forced myself to not idly practice setting up more reverse cages, or reverse nets, as I started calling them in my head, since that's what they looked like. I wanted to reserve my strength for later. And after we ate a light lunch, Lance suggested we try it. Just like that, just sitting on the sofa together. He showed me the location of Avalon by allowing me to watch him find it. It was strange that I'd never considered how large Lance's sphere was. I hadn't paid attention, and he was so casual in his use of his abilities that I just never noticed. Or maybe his sphere worked differently when he was spreading it through nano-networks instead of, well, the real world. In a split second, it was just there, and I could feel his psi all around me. It encompassed everything within the small cage I'd created for myself, and far beyond it. I shut my eyes, and to keep myself from getting lost within my sphere now that I knew just how wide it was, I expanded the reverse cage within it. Then tracked the presence of Lance's psi, its silvery violet painting a clear image in my mind. It didn't take long to find the bright spot where he had caged in a specific location. It shone bright in my mind like a beacon, or a target. That was Avalon. It was unassuming, like he said. I could see it in my mind. The entrance was hidden in a tight network of tall, flat-topped hills of rock and scraggly brush. He'd said it was once an above-ground structure, but I couldn't see anything that remained of that. The complex itself was underground. I could dimly sense it stretching for kilometers. It must be massive. I wasn't sure how much of it I should, or could, protect, but I would have to try to protect as much of it as possible.
Have you found it?
I can see it, but I need you to retract your sphere. I think it'll be easier for me that way. No offense. He laughed softly and withdrew. I could still sense him in my physical location, but it was much easier to block that out without his psi targeting the same place I was. Okay, let's do this. The act of setting up a command sequence for one psi wasn't that difficult, as long as you created a clear image of a specific result, and the process to get there. But it wasn't as simple as just picturing it. Going from mental image to action was where most people got hung up, at least according to what Lance had said. For me, that wasn't the difficult thing. It was that I wasn't even physically in the location where I was trying to set a cage. My mind was there, my perception anyway. My psi was touching that place even though I was not. But the further away something was, the less clear it was, like looking through foggy glass. Lance was certain that would be enough for me. I mentally went over the steps Lance taught me for separating a part of my psi and setting it up so it would stay in place, caging the entrance and surrounding area of Avalon. It was an enormous area to hide, though. Cold sweat ran down my back as I tried to weave my psi together into that mental equivalent of a net. A massive net. I didn't even know if I had enough psi for it. Then I had to cast it over the area and hoped it stayed in place. It felt like it took forever, like twining each strand of psi together individually. It was tiring, and it became more and more difficult to focus the longer it took. I knew I had to hurry before I lost control of it. I tied off the last end, then severed the psi from myself, hoping it worked. The small ones worked, but the scale of this was totally different. I wanted to hover there for a moment just to make sure it took. But exhaustion hit. I snapped back to my physical location again, and my awareness of everything else shriveled as I sat there, breathing heavier than I realized I had been. A faint throb of pain appeared in my head, the first sign that had been more taxing than I expected. Are you gonna get the bloody nose?
Morgan, are you alright?
Yes, just a mild headache. It's nothing serious.
Are you sure that's all?
I smiled at him in a way I hoped was reassuring. Yes, that's all. I didn't expect it to be so tiring, but I tried to protect as much of the area as I could, not just the entrance.
I didn't want you to overdo it. I should have waited until tomorrow.
I'm fine. And this is important. I don't imagine it's wise to wait. Anyway, I think it succeeded. As soon as I severed the cage, I sort of was back, so I don't know for sure.
I'm sure it was. It's you, after all.
He reached for my face, brushing my hair aside as he watched me carefully.
If you did the best you could, that's all anyone can ask.
He pulled me to him in a brief hug, lips resting against the top of my head.
I'll check back in on it in a little while. In the meantime, how about some tea? I want you to rest for a while. Waiting may not be wise, but neither is overtaxing your body.
All right. But after that, I think I'm going to practice some more.
You're going to rest. Even mild fatigue should be taken seriously. And if you overtax yourself now, then in a few days' time...
He trailed off, allowing the sentence to hang there unfinished for a space.
We could find ourselves regretting it.
You're right. I'll rest for the rest of today. But I can't afford to just take it easy, either. There are some other things I want you to show me.
Then later today you can ask me, and I can explain the principles. But no practicing anything until tomorrow.
Deal.
Sometimes it feels like who and what I am always complicates things. It was true as Deimos, it was true as King. And now it appears to be doubly true as Lance.
Always affectionate, always. I think it's others that complicate things, not you, Lance.
Perhaps.
It wasn't complicated until colonists arrived, right?
In fairness to the colonists, the planet was empty and I was asleep. They didn't realize anything about it would be complicated.
That simplifies things a lot, I'll admit. Do you regret that humans came here? Or do you wish it had been Philossons that returned?
No. It's difficult to say I was even surprised that it was a different species that returned to this world. That was always a possibility. In a way, I'm glad it was humans. Another species may not have been as receptive to my existence. If I have regrets, it was that I didn't understand your people better back then. I love humans. I love people. I avoid involvement because I think it's better for them, not because I have regrets that humans are here. That's also why I refused dormancy again after the war. I spent so long alone that I didn't want to spend even more time alone. I thought it would be enough to watch. It's strange that I've watched so many, and never felt the connection I felt to you even before we met. When I first chose to interject myself in your situation, I thought perhaps I'd somehow get you to someone else. To Nissa, or somewhere I thought you'd be safe. But then you looked so frightened, and you were hurt. So I brought you here to stabilize your condition. I said it would just be until you healed. But the more you stayed, the more I wanted you to stay longer. The more I became interested in you. Not as just an intriguing human, but you as an individual.
You're thousands of years old. Why would you be interested in someone like me?
It's true King saw millions of people born, live, die. But you're the first one to show me all the small beauties and failings of a human in such an intimate way. The first who could give me each moment and live there with me until the next arrives. You're the first person I've got to know this deeply. And here we are. Things are complicated again because I got involved. Despite that, I am glad I interfered. So very glad.
He touched my cheek, a soft smile coming to his face. Me too. No matter how complicated it is. With a new reverse cage around Avalon, what's the next step?
As you are aware, we have limited options. Either of us simply hiding isn't among them. Your turning your life over to Endgame should not be among them either.
He held up a hand to cut me off when I started to speak.
But I understand we must be open to all options, even the ones that are less than ideal. I know you prefer to think ahead, where I might be inclined to wait and see what happens. So I have been thinking ahead. I agree we should contact Vireo regarding your status. That at least is something we can begin to prepare, though it's unlikely to be ready in time to serve us for this situation. It would be best to not wait. I also think it would be wise to teach you stronger defenses than just shields. And though I'm loath to do it, I think learning at least the Psy-Burst attack would be wise.
I agree.
That will give us something to focus on until Nyx decides to move.
For Lance, that was a sort of unspoken acknowledgement that we couldn't run from this, not without endangering something much bigger. So if Nyx sent a team to us, it might end in a confrontation. What I wanted to figure out was how to ensure that confrontation wasn't the two of us against an entire team. And that, I think, would be the tricky part. Several days passed with us caught in a strange limbo as we just waited for something to happen. In that time, we discussed so many potential scenarios, as well as ways to deal with them. And, as we said, we tried to start the ball rolling when it came to my obtaining citizenship with the Nomos. That required Vireo's help, so Lance reluctantly told him what was happening. He was hesitant to get the Nomos involved because it could mean putting some of their people in danger. But they long protected both King and Avalon. They saw it as their duty. That said, open conflict wasn't their style. By necessity, they avoided anything that might attract the attention of larger political powers. They didn't want their city locations known, and they didn't want to draw attention to the location of Avalon or Lance by mistake. In the past, they would stealthily encourage people away from both, or elicit Endgame's help. But the current situation didn't allow for their usual strategies. Vireo suggested our biggest hope for solving the current situation would be for Endgame's border patrols to find Nyx before they reached us. Even if captured, Nyx wouldn't be inclined to tell Endgame the reason for their trip. If Endgame learned my location, they would be the ones to gain a new queen. If we could predict where Nyx intended to enter the wastes and could orchestrate an encounter between them and Endgame, that could end the situation in an instant. It wasn't as if there weren't incursions into the wastes sometimes, and Endgame was used to dealing with that. Isn't Nyx just gonna send, like, another team at another time? Like, just wait till Endgame forgets about it, like, okay, we're gonna go, like, over here now? But depending what Nyx's movements and plans were, setting out that kind of encounter proved difficult, and there was no way to plan ahead. So I spent most of my time training and waiting. Shields, teleporting, something Lance referred to as a burst flare, and the ubiquitous Psy-Burst. I've noticed a lot of these are bursts, flares, bombs, flashes, and the like. I wonder who had the unlucky job of looking up synonyms so they could name this stuff.
I suppose when a technique is utilized frequently, one does want a convenient way to refer to it.
So then you just tack the word psi onto something with the right amount of oomph and you've got yourself a new psychic attack or defense.
It was fine until they turned to Latin because they ran out of English words.
I can't wait until I start learning those techniques.
I still wish you didn't have to, but now that the transmission from the rabbit has been accessed and viewed multiple times, it looks like that's wishful thinking.
Okay, so we know they've seen it. Well, they know I'm here, and they probably know that I know, but at least they aren't aware of you yet.
That is beneficial, yes. There was never a clear image of my face, so that at least is a silver lining.
Alright.
I feel I should have found a way to delete the files without leaving evidence. It's frustrating I could not.
Everything has limitations, Lance. from computers to people. You're very powerful, and you have an incredible history behind you. But you're still human.
Regret is also part of being human.
It is, I know.
With this, it's only a matter of time before they dispatch a team to Asteri. I've already uncovered a few communications to that effect. I'm sure there are in-person meetings to which I'm not privy.
What kind of time frame? We have to be ready to stand our ground. At this point, is their intent to kill or apprehend me? I feel it's best not to know the answer to this question. We're doing everything we can as far as this is, so... In your estimation, what kind of time frame do you think we're dealing with?
It's difficult to say. No decisions have been made yet. But there was a single message that indicated they could arrive in Asteri in as little as 40 hours.
That's fast.
They may wish to move fast because their bot was destroyed, and the conclusion is that you must be aware and may flee the area.
What can we expect once they reach Asteri?
From there, they'll attempt to enter the Oases. I imagine they'll travel largely by teleportation, since it's the most effective way to avoid detection. Which unfortunately makes Virio's plan to orchestrate a chance encounter with Endgame's border patrols impossible. And then it all depends on the range and stamina of their knights, how fast they can make it here. Regardless, they are still days out.
I still can't believe that queen ranks are so desirable they'd go to all this trouble.
The drive to obtain more power in Delphine is strong, but I admit this is unusual. They are risking going head-to-head with Endgame, and the Nomos. But also risking more than that if the Triad learns there's an incursion into neutral territory. It's as if they're dealing with a threat on another front, something that's made them desperate. The Delphine government can afford to expend resources to acquire you, but this is extreme. Perhaps I can try to uncover what might be driving them.
I get the feeling they won't be interested in negotiating, even if we figure out what's making them so determined.
We shouldn't rule it out until I delve deeper into Delphine's records. Everything regarding Nyx is heavily shielded behind layers of encryptions and security protocols.
And yeah, even if you can't negotiate, knowledge is power, so the more information you have, the better.
Even I can't blast through it without a little effort.
His words cut off, eyes going far away for a moment. His expression was puzzled, then a slight smile crossed his face. What is it?
Kesa has taken notice of Nyx's movements. I have a system in place that alerts me of his movements. However, I wasn't even aware he was watching Nyx.
Interesting, little brother getting involved, okay.
He's grown.
There was a hint of pride in his voice, one that almost brought a smile to my face as well. Does this mean Crimson is going to act too? Because...
I'm not sure. Crimson has a great deal of power, and certainly they'd be keen to get their hands on a new queen rank. But I doubt an incursion into the Oases is a risk my father would be willing to take. That said, they would not want Nyx to acquire you either. That much is certain.
Crimson. That was something I hadn't considered before. Asking Endgame for help meant turning myself in, but Crimson was Lance's family. What would happen if Crimson and Nyx both showed up here?
That would likely end in a violent clash, one that could attract the attention of Endgame's bishops. Nyx and Crimson do not get on.
Because of what happened to you?
In part. They never fully confirmed who was behind my disappearance. But the Delphine government is not pleased with the amount of sway Crimson holds on the Knight side. That is the bigger issue. They avoid open conflict. But Crimson and Nyx often clash where others can't see.
If your brother knew you were here, and could get here without Endgame noticing...
I can see where you're going with this, Morgan. But I'm not sure it would turn out the way you hope. I'm not Deimos anymore. Not as I once was. We can't know how they'd react to me.
If I thought my brother was dead and later learned he was alive, no matter what he'd gone through, I'd still accept him.
Kesa is a good person. father is a complicated man. Regardless, if Crimson moves, Endgame will not sit back. Magnus watches Kesa very closely.
If Endgame comes here...
If Endgame moves, it'll be before the others, most likely. Magnus knows this exact location. If he realizes Nyx or Crimson is moving towards the waste, I will be the first thing he checks.
Would he be able to figure out I'm here?
He is a king rank. Though he won't be able to look deeply into any of my systems, he will figure it out from Nyx. Or Crimson. And with the range of Ariel Vaughn, they can get here quickly and with little warning.
So if your brother makes a single move towards the waste, our time frame will shrink to nothing the moment Endgame knows about it.
That is accurate. Nyx, however, Magnus does not watch as closely.
That was a good reason not to encourage Crimson this way. But if we could get them here without Endgame knowing... Can you keep Magnus from being able to track your brother's movements? Block him out of whatever means he usually uses to do it. The same way I added an extra layer of protection for Avalon.
I should be able to.
That should at least diminish the threat of any surprise arrivals from Endgame.
For better or worse, I believe Endgame's involvement in the situation is inevitable.
I've been feeling that way as well.
If we want them to leave you alone, we will have to find something better to negotiate with.
Something more interesting to them than a new queen rank?
Yes.
Lance, are you doing the thing? Are you gonna do the thing you did in Magnus's route, Lance? Is there something like that?
I believe so. I did create the organization after all, and I have watched its development for many, many years.
Are you going to tell me what your plan is?
Give me some time to think through all the details.
Alright. Though I hope you think fast.
I'm quite good at that.
Alright. I'm squinting at you, Lance. I'm squinting. By the way, if you want to take over Endgame again, I'm in full support of this plan. Only if I get to rule by your side as queen, though. Just saying. Much later, when I had a quiet moment, I curled up on the sofa with a tablet, looking up something Lance had mentioned earlier but hadn't taught me yet. Mind bombs. While I did that, he was working to make sure Magnus wouldn't be able to spy on Kesa as easily anymore, at least for the time being. And I assumed he was thinking through the details on his negotiation strategy. But I was going to come up with a contingency in case I didn't like that plan. Because as far as I could tell, we didn't have many things to negotiate with. He'd made it clear he'd throw himself away before he let me do something that might make me unhappy. Wow, it's almost like you guys are made for each other because you react the same way to things. That made me nervous. And I wouldn't let him do that. Even if it meant taking matters into my own hands a little. I just hoped with what I was planning to attempt, Lance wouldn't be too upset with me in the end. I was going to need to know several things. My exact location, how far I was away from Delphine, and most importantly, a way to quietly get in touch with Jack Visser without a very talented king rank knowing. Uh-oh.